I used to teach high school, so most people know that by now. And I loved my job. I loved going to the schoolhouse. I loved interacting with the students. I loved being in front of the students and teaching the students. I loved my job. And I didn't even know it then. I mean, my goodness, that would have been 40 years ago. I didn't get back then that what I loved was instilling a love of learning.
Welcome to the show called Let's Talk Homeschool, brought to you by Apologia Educational Ministries. This is the show where we talk about everything homeschooling, the who, what, when, where, why, and how. We want to affirm and encourage you in the decision to homeschool, challenge and inspire you to take it to new heights, and celebrate everything you get to experience along the way in this adventure of a lifetime. Today's show is titled, How to Instill a Love of Learning. Very homeschooling topic. Okay, Rachel, let's talk homeschool.
That was our whole goal. I'm just going to jump to the chase. I didn't know it at first. In fact, when we first started, I thought it was about recreating the public school setting, complete with desk and posters and hall passes at home. I thought, and following their lesson plan and what they thought was important, I thought that was what we were going to do. But ultimately, what we're talking about today, this is what revolutionized our homeschooling.
Right. It really is, because we've all known and experienced conversations with people in elementary and high school, and you ask them something like, what's your favorite subject? And their answer is very often, I don't know, I hate school.
And I hate that conversation because I used to teach high school, so most people know that by now. And I loved my job. I loved going to the schoolhouse. I loved interacting with the students. I loved being in front of the students and teaching the students. I loved my job. And I didn't even know it then. I mean, my goodness, that would have been 40 years ago. I didn't get back then that what I loved was instilling a love of learning.
Right.
And I didn't realize then what I know now is you can't give what you don't have. And I loved passing the baton of education and learning on to my students because I loved learning as a person. And yeah, I mean, in the years that have passed, I love high school students. And so very often in a grocery line, if someone's checking me out, or Chick-fil-A, there's a call out for Chick-fil-A, or I've gone on several mission trips with high school kids and just interacting with them and getting to know them. So, what year are you in high school and what's your favorite subject? And invariably, I don't think I have ever talked to a student in the public sector who has said, I love school.
Right.
I don't think I've ever had that conversation.
It's very sad, because I would say the same thing with myself. I don't know of a conversation where it's gone that direction. And
that is a natural resource that we have been given by God that we are squandering as a nation. That we have all of these curious minds, all of these students. I love what Deb Bell used to say. She was such an inspiration to me when I was a young homeschool mom. And one of the things that she said in one of her keynotes, I was sitting there eagerly on the first or second row, just taking in everything she would say. And she said, your kids come wired for this. I mean, this is not like you have to do all of this work to get them ready for school. Like, they come ready. They come wired, curious. They come wanting to know and understand. They come with millions of questions. And I started thinking about that even as I was on the front row going, man, that's so true.
Yes.
And what do we do? In those first few years, we're like, how does this happen? Why does this happen? What's going on? Where's this? How? And we just go, oh, would they just shut up? But no. That's it, man. I mean, when they're first starting to talk, as someone who studied language in college also, what they're doing initially is just imitating conversation. That's what they've noticed, that in conversation you ask a question and then somebody else answers. So at first it's just imitation, but it grows very quickly into curiosity. They really want to know, why is the sky red in the evening? Why is it pink in the morning? Why does a bee do this? Why does our dog do that? I mean, so the imitation turns to curiosity, and then that's the moment. Those are the moments that we have an opportunity to instill, to fan the flames of this curiosity into this learning.
No, it's so true. And so part of what a person might ask is, well, then what's wrong with the system that sucks away this interest and this curiosity and this love of learning? And I'm going to read a quote from Neil Postman, the author of Amusing Ourselves to Death.
Great book.
You may be familiar with that book. Definitely a must read. But he says, modern secular education is failing because it has no moral, social, or intellectual center. The curriculum is not, in fact, a course of study, which is the definition of curriculum, a path, a journey that you're taking them on. It's not a course of study at all, but a meaningless hodgepodge of subjects. Right. It does not even put forth a clear vision of what constitutes an educated person, unless it is a person who possesses, quote, marketable skills. And so it's become a game. And the students know that, and they just get good at playing the game of a hodgepodge of courses that aren't even related to each other, with no clear end of, so who am I going to be? What am I going to be when I finish this supposed journey? Because it's not even a journey or a course of study, a path that you're taking them on. And so then the question is, well, then homeschool family, what can we do to not do this, but to actually instill a love of learning? And
well, but I mean, I want to back up just a little bit, because you're right. The kids are smart, and they do get that it's a game. And so they start to play, and the kids who get it and are good at playing that game are the winners, and they represent a very small minority, And they get out not good at the curriculum or the subjects, but they get out good at the game.
Right, exactly.
But there's a large majority that never get good at the game. And so they come to closely associate, if not equivocate, learning with drudgery and frustration and purposelessness. And so those are the ones that I talked about earlier. We're squandering this natural resource of all of these curious minds, and they just shut down. And they're like, you know what? I can't
figure it out. I can't
figure it out. Nobody really wants to tell me. It's the first question in algebra class. How am I ever going to use this? Which is not a dumb question. It's a really good question. But education has failed to answer that, not just about algebra, but across the curriculum in a way that kids can grab onto and actually lean into their curiosity. And that's the opportunity that homeschool families have. And that is rooting the education we want to pass on to our children into what it means to live lives and honor to the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. That's the opportunity we have.
Well, exactly. And that leads right into the 5 points that we'll mention and talk about. So in several of your talks and several of mine, we hit on one or two, or occasionally all of the following 5 ways that you can help instill a love of learning and do what you just said. The first is to instill a love of God.
Right.
It's the greatest commandment. So, if there's anything we should be doing, it should be the greatest thing on earth, which is to learn to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. When Jesus was asked what's the greatest commandment, he referred to Deuteronomy 6 with that very thing. Love God first, love your neighbor second. So those are the first 2 things we can do, which is all about relationships. You can see from the beginning. When we started our school and started feeling the freedom and realizing, well, let's not play this game that is meaningless. Let's play something different that is meaningful. And instead of reading, writing, and arithmetic, which are pretty good goals academically, we had 3 goals of relationships, reasoning, and resolve as 3 of our goals in our homeschool. And relationships, the point being, is a very important part of the education that's meaningful. And that's a relationship with God, with family, with siblings, with neighbors.
Right. Well, and that goes back to giving purpose for the learning. Right. Why are you doing algebra? Why are you doing spelling? Why are you doing grammar? Why are you doing history? Why are you doing anything? We now have a secular society that has no reason for existing.
Right.
They're not here on purpose. They don't have a reason. Everything's random. So why learn algebra? That's a good question. if you don't have any purpose.
Right.
But as homeschool families who seek to honor God in word and deed, we can ground our kids with the truth of God's existence and his love for us, his forgiveness and mercy and grace available to us. And as we live in honor to him and obedience to him, trusting him and his faithful sovereignty, it changes everything.
It does.
And it gives you a foundation to build the why questions of algebra, right? I mean, simply put, you take advantage of the opportunity that God gives you to train your mind and to learn these things for his purpose and his glory. You may not know all those things today, but in time he will reveal those things.
Right, because you're literally on a life path and journey.
Exactly.
A sanctification journey as a Christian, and God will reveal things along the way. And even as we put plans together, God will redirect those steps as we pay attention to his call and join him in the work that he's given us to do.
Yeah.
And it's you made me think of Ephesians 2:10, that we are workmanships of God, made to do good works that he prepared in advance for us to do.
Right.
And so as we educate our children, part of what we're trying to do is help them ask the question, what has God prepared me to do?
Right.
What is he calling me to do? And then they start paying attention to that. They start asking and thinking and pondering and meditating and praying about that. And that's part of their relationship with God, their relationship with neighbor, and their call to what is the end goal of this educational journey that I'm starting, that we really want to be not just a love of, but to last a lifetime
And
as
that's
well.
a faith journey, right? I mean, it's not like you give birth to a kid and you look at their left foot and it's printed on the bottom what they're going to be. And so that's what you have to do. I mean, wouldn't that be easier? It's a persistent revelation. I mean, your own career path has been a lot of different things. I mean, you weren't one thing. You weren't just a mechanical engineer, right? You weren't just a math head. You weren't just a mechanical engineer. You weren't just a general manager. You're now an entrepreneurial. I mean, there's all of these different things that you've been along the way. And so it's about our faithfulness in taking advantage of the educational opportunities that he lays before us, that we lay before our children, trusting that God's going to weave it all together ultimately.
So let's continue with these. We had the love of God, instilling a love of neighbor, then a love of reading.
Oh, yeah.
Which is huge to any learning process. I was reading something recently, which was talking about how kids in college today can't read. They basically don't know. They basically don't know how to read. Their attention span is so short that they've never read complete books.
Oh, wow.
They've only read excerpts and articles and tweets, and in the whole social media world that they're in, they can't sit down and read a long form book.
Wow. I mean, there's nothing more exhilarating to me than to finish a really good book. I mean, I tend to slow down at the end because I don't want it to end. I mean, that's true confession. But the exhilaration and the satisfaction of having finished a book is pretty glorious.
Oh, yes,
it's sad to me that they're not having that experience. But I saw that even when I was teaching all those years ago, that the students even then, of course, textbooks then were teaching via excerpts instead of whole works, which I think is how it starts too, is that the system gives into it, right, instead of challenging. Right. And the love of learning and the love of reading are so intertwined together.
So
it's
connected.
So foundational. I loved reading to our kids. I was just thinking, I was downstairs reading before we did this today, and I was literally thinking to myself, I miss the days when I would all the kids would be, sitting around the living room and I would be reading history or science or Bible to them. Those are the glory days. And being able to read with gusto and imagination and asking them questions and then assigning them to read on their own and then asking them questions about what they're reading. That love of reading is really, really key. There's no sense in anybody hating reading.
Right.
It might take, and in fact, I would say if you have a student, we won't chase this very far. Maybe we'd do another podcast on this, but if you were to discover that one of your homeschool students doesn't like reading, that's something worth unpacking and trying to figure out what is that about? Is it an attention span issue? Is it the content? Maybe they just haven't found their genre that they enjoy. but that's worth trying to figure that out,
Right,
because that's a whole lifelong thing.
Right, because it could be a visual issue,
It could.
an auditory processing issue.
That they don't know how to communicate.
Exactly.
And so I think if you have a student that's really struggling there, don't ever stop reading aloud to your student as a means of motivation to get them to read on their own. Your reading aloud is the motivation for them to read on their own. So don't stop that. But if they really are having a hard time getting into it or really loving it, that's worth trying to really help them with.
No, that's true. So
set them up for success and help them come to love learning.
Exactly.
Reading, I mean, yeah.
So you got the love of God, the love of neighbor, love of reading, which is strongly connected to this big theme we're talking about, the love of learning. But then the last and final point in this educational journey that we want to take our kids on is to know Jesus. So I love Acts 4:13, and it says how the people were astonished at Peter and John at their bold preaching because they were uneducated people, is what the scripture says. But then it finishes by concluding, but they took note that they had been with Jesus. And
what was the definitive? What made them stand out?
Right.
It's
that they had been with Jesus. And 2 Peter 1:3 says that we have everything we need for life and godliness according to the power of the knowledge of Christ. And if we really believe that the knowledge of Christ, knowing Christ, will give us and our kids everything we need for life and godliness, then it opens up a whole world in terms of what we can love, who we can love, how we can love, and how we can learn and love that entire lifelong journey of reading, discovering, exploring, and learning all about the God's world that He's created.
Yeah, and it's an inexhaustible subject matter. And I don't mean that in the progressive sense that there are new things about Jesus. Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever, so He's not changing. But as we grow and mature, and as we learn more about ourselves and the world, we come to know Him more and better and deeper. And certainly that's true about His Word. Right. I don't believe it's changing, but I do believe He's changing us. And because of that, we learn more about Him all the time. And knowing Him changes everything. When you teach your kids about Jesus, and again, I would advocate, we do this often, I would advocate that that's where you start your day with your kids. That's the big rock you put in first. It's not the subject that you try to sneak in if you've got time or the kids aren't too cranky or people aren't falling asleep on the sofa. It's what you do first, because that says this is priority, this is important, so get that first.
Right. And allow the questions and answers and linger if necessary, because you're homeschooling. You don't have to get everything done when a bell rings.
Right.
You can let a conversation last longer than normal, last shorter than normal, based on interest levels, based on curiosity, based on, are they understanding this or not? Do you really want to help them? And I remember many times after breakfast or lunch, we were there for a long time because one or more kids had more discussion left in them.
Yeah. Those were good days.
It was. So those are some ways that you can help instill a love of learning, which gives meaning to this whole educational journey that you're trying to put your kids on. So, well, as always, it's been great being with you today. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. This has been Let's Davis and Rachael Carman. And until next time, we are walking by faith and enjoying the homeschooling adventure of a lifetime.